4 years have passed since the first entry in the Modern Warfare franchise. We've all grown up with these games, from being the FNG all those years ago, to taking down Zakhaev alongside Captain Price, living through the infamous massacre at the airport, and having our hearts torn to pieces by General Shepard. These characters and this story has been a part of us for 4 long years. In Modern Warfare 3 will be the final chapter. The world is at war. The Russians didn't stop with the US, all of Europe is now under attack, and Makarov is still pulling the strings. MW2 ended with so many questions unanswered, so much vengeance to be had, and MW3 picks up right where you left off. I know this game holds a special place in the hearts of many gamers out there. It's undoubtedly one of the most emotional games in the Call of Duty franchise, and it's the end of one of the best stories ever told in gaming. I'll never forget as a kid seeing the trailer for the first time and watching the World War III logo flip into MW3. It still gives me chills watching that with the iconic night vision sound in the background. MW3 is tasked with wrapping up one of arguably the most important and loved stories so far in the Call of Duty franchise. And thankfully, it does a beautiful job doing just that. If you're new, this is a retrospective series where we go through mission by mission, talking through each one, and at the end we'll give it a ranking overall. We've already done the first 2 entries in the Modern Warfare series, so be sure to give those a watch first, and we've also done the World at War campaign as well, which is just another banger. Last thing, these do take a ton of time to make, so I'd appreciate it a lot if you hit that sub button if you do enjoy, and leave a comment letting me know what you think. Anyways, I'm glad you're here, and let's get into it. This game's story tackles the monumental task of showing what a modern-day world war could be like. With chemical warfare, threats of nukes at every turn, major cities destroyed, and all that even without nukes ever being launched. Still, mass destruction anyway. As always, you follow 2 characters, one with the 141 and one with the US military. This time, the 2 interact and even work alongside each other a little more than they have in the past, so that provides for some interesting dynamics. This game provides a beautiful end to the story for the characters. The game has so many positives, the gameplay is refreshing and has several different elements that keep you entertained. Each mission has a unique and interesting setting that provides for some amazing backdrops for the story. And as always, the voice acting and dialogue, especially on the 141 side, is flawless. However, as much as I do love this campaign, it isn't perfect. I try to stay on the more positive side of things in these videos because that's just who I am. But we can't look back on these games only through a positive lens when there are glaring issues. So I think we start to see some holes in the story immediately. The Russians are pushed out of the US, but rather than retreating, they somehow amass a re-invasion force that's strong enough to occupy the entirety of Europe. I realize they use the chemical attacks to quote-unquote soften things up, but still, it just seems like a stretch on top of the already glazed over fact that they invaded the heart of the US unnoticed. Also, as much as I do love the cool backdrops for each mission, it does just seem like they were trying to replicate that feeling of awe with playing through the MW2 missions while fighting in DC. In MW3, you fight next to the Eiffel Tower, inside the New York Stock Exchange, in a massive hotel in Dubai, and the list just goes on. While some of the settings are just outright cool, like the mine and castle missions, some of it just feels a little forced. It seems like they looked back at COD 4 and MW2 and saw that they had a formula that worked and then replicated it. While I don't think that's a terrible idea, it just seemed a bit obvious at times. There were several times in my playthrough, I was like, oh, here's the equivalent of this mission from MW2, and here's the part where they use that shock value to make you feel desperate. It also really bothers me that we never got to play out what was hinted at from the ending of the American mission in Modern Warfare 2. I don't see how or why they didn't let us play as the Americans on a counterattack into Russia after they had attacked Washington, D.C. I feel like that was a huge missed opportunity to dig into that passion we felt from the Rangers, and instead we got a still entertaining and compelling, but less heartfelt story of defending Europe. Anyways, I'm not going to talk on and on about it, because overall I do feel like this game did what it set out to do. It successfully delivered the ending to the character's story, if not the overall plot. Don't get it twisted, this game is still an absolute banger, and is without a doubt something that's worth going back to play to this day. As I said, you pick up right where you left off in MW2, literally. After a brief intro/loading screen cinematic that we've all grown to love, you regain consciousness as Soap, on an operating table still reeling from the stab wound from General Shepard. The quick introduction back into the game throws you right back alongside Soap and Price, and serves as a good reminder of where we left the story in MW2 2 years ago. After only a few moments, you're back in a loading screen cinematic that follows the same format as has become standard in the Modern Warfare series. It gives you a brief look into the state of the world, with Russians still occupying the US, but now on the brink of being forced out. I will say, although the 141 side is still amazing, the US side for these loading screens really misses out on someone like General Shepard voicing them over. It's just all around less gripping, the voices, the cinematics, the lines of dialogue themselves. I feel like they could have done a better job with this to let it really sink in the importance of what's happening here. The cinematic introduces you to the US side, as your character Frost will be fighting alongside Delta Force. Your mission is to take down a communications jammer on top of the New York Stock Exchange. The developers assume at this point that most players have played at least one game in the franchise before, as there's no tutorial at all, unlike previous games. You're thrown directly into a firefight in the middle of New York City, and you're right back to feeling that same way you did 2 years ago in MW2. Seeing the destruction of New York City is a tough watch for Americans, but I do think that, while cool, it just doesn't hit as hard as seeing that normal suburban neighborhood or Washington DC getting torn to shreds. They introduce you to some new game mechanics immediately, with some cool new weapons and a hybrid sight on your gun. You fight through the streets of New York, making your way to the stock exchange, and fighting through the main area with all those computer screens and TVs was a pretty cool dynamic. At the top, you take down the comm tower, but it's not over yet. With the tower down, air support is now available, and you get to use some sweet Predator missiles just like the old days. You hop on a chopper, and after some intense air-to-air combat, you have a close call, but your team makes it out in one piece. As far as first missions go, it definitely did its job. It's nothing to lose your mind over, but the setting is cool, there are several different types of gameplay, they introduce you to some new features of the game, and allow you to experience old ones as well. It gets you right back into the groove of that Modern Warfare style. As far as characters go, the Delta Squad didn't really get much personality from this one, and unfortunately, I think that's a trend throughout the whole game. Compared to either of the first missions of COD 4 and MW2, Price and Shepard get established so well, so these characters really just feel kind of forgotten about. With the comms tower destroyed, the US is making great progress with taking back New York. Back with the Delta Force, the Russians have been pushed back to the sea, and you're tasked with taking out a Russian submarine that could bomb all of New York City. You load in underwater, as the loading cinematic just informed you that your infill point would be a tunnel that has been collapsed. You and your squad use mini subs to drive through the flooded tunnel, and the impact on the city really sinks in.
Damn. Think anyone got out? Nothing we can do for them now.
Driving the subs offer a unique experience with some added tension when you find the Russian mines, and being underwater lets them really show off the graphic improvements that were pretty stellar at the time. Your team places some charges on the Russian sub, causing it to rise to the surface, and you commence a close quarters assault inside the sub that is very reminiscent to Crew Expendable, the first mission on COD 4. After taking the sub, you use the Russians' own missiles against their own ships, and your squad makes a run for it on some rafts, just like in the MW2 finale. I will say, while definitely over the top, this escape style section is super entertaining, and seeing the effects from the bombs all around you is super cool. The water obviously has some reactions with waves and stuff because of the explosion, so it makes it super difficult to drive, but they did a really good job on this. Your squad's success leads to the full retreat of the Russians out of the US, and now the real war begins. I think they did a great job with these first two missions, providing some super dynamic gameplay that really showcased a lot of what MW3 has to offer. I think it also set the tone with regard to how the story will be told. The US side will be more of a worldview, the larger effects and the quote-unquote World War III aspect will be seen through their eyes, whereas with the 141 side, you'll be digging more into the character aspect, with a more focused story of chasing the ever-elusive Makarov. After the strictly business cinematics of the US Army side, you get a classic reintroduction to the 141 side, with the ever-dramatic Captain Price.
Beyond the jagged edges of war, there were still Russians who rejected Makarov's lunacy. Men willing to stand against the tide.
Price, we've got vital signs, but they're weak. Soap won't last without proper attention.
He's a hard bastard. Trust me, he'll make it.
You're introduced to your character Yuri, a mysterious ex-Spetsnaz operative that supposedly hates Makarov even more than Price. Your 141 squad can never catch a break, as somehow Makarov has already pinpointed your location and launched an assault before Soap has had any time to recover. You have to defend against the heavy Russian assault while pushing through to a supply crate Nikolai says will help you make your escape. The action is reminiscent to the South American missions from MW2, with enemies swarming from rooftops and hidden alleys, all while having to avoid some fleeing civilians. You make your way to the house Nikolai I told you about, and down in the basement, Price reveals a UGV, an unmanned ground vehicle. Of course, the controls are in Russian, so your character, Yuri, needs to be the one to take over the controls. Driving the mini tank through waves of Russians is super satisfying, and easily allows you to slice through their forces, carving the way for Price and Soap to make it to the chopper for evac. But the UGV gets taken out, and now you realize that Yuri is still back in that basement. The drone had you feeling invincible, but now that armor is gone. You have to sprint through the chaos alone as missiles rain down around you, and finally, it seems like Yuri's story was very short-lived. But of course, the perfectly placed river saves the day, and your squad is right there for pickup. I wonder, do you guys think this mission would have been a better fit to be the first mission in MW3? I feel like it just had some more character to it. Sure, fighting the Russians inside of New York City had its shock value, and it was very cool, but I don't know, you'll have to let me know if I'm crazy for thinking that. With that said, this one was definitely a fun one, and a good re-intro into the chaos that is the 141 side. Driving the UGV is super fun. The character dynamics between Price, Nikolai, and Yuri create some curiosity to know the backstory of your new character, and with that, you're right back into the groove of the Modern Warfare style. After another very well done cinematic, it's already pretty evident that they seem to be trying a lot harder on the 141 side for these. I'm not necessarily talking about the visuals, as both sides are pretty solid on that aspect, just mainly the dialogue and voice acting. As Price's monologue comes to an end, you load in as Agent Harkov of the Russian Federation, serving on the Russian Secret Service equivalent and protecting their president on his plane. You shadow the president, seeing how he interacts with his colleagues and family, and it establishes a sense of respect. Even though the Russians still believe that the US were to blame for the massacre at the airport, he still seeks peace to avoid more bloodshed. Of course, as soon as peace is mentioned, gunshots are heard and hijackers are taking over the plane. You fight through the plane to get the president to his safe room, and everything's going well for a while. You just fight your way through the massive plane, but then it seems that the cockpit is under attack and the plane goes nose down. While in the nosedive, you have to take out some enemies in zero gravity, foreshadowing some future games years in advance. Seriously though, while absolutely over the top, I appreciate the variety of gameplay, and I'm sure I'll continue to note how over the top this game is, and while I don't want it to be completely outlandish, it's just a video game at the end of the day. The point of it is to be fun. If it were ultra-realistic military gameplay, it would be super slow and repetitive, and while there may be a place for that style of action, that just isn't Call of Duty. Speaking of unrealistic, the plane crashes and drags its way through the earth as you stand there, watch, and shoot at enemies on the other half of the now bisected plane. Everything is looking fine, and as Obi-Wan would say, it seems like just another happy landing. But then, a flaming projectile plane engine collides directly with your character. After a brief period of unconsciousness, your commander rallies you from the impossible circumstances, and you push on to make sure the president is safe. You hear on your comms that a team has the president secured, but they're quickly being overrun. After pushing through a few waves of attackers, you make it to the president, still safe and sound. A chopper swoops in to take the president to safety, and you pull the door open to reveal Makarov himself. He wastes no time ending the rest of the president's guard, and lets the president know that he's after the nuclear launch codes. Of course, the president refuses, but as we met her earlier, we know the president has a weak point: his daughter. While absolutely over the top with the plane crash sequence, the storytelling in this mission was done super well. They set up the president, his values, and foreshadow how Makarov will get what he wants. Sliding back the door to reveal Makarov was also done very well, and at this point in the story, he really is almost like this deified foe. He's been around for years, and the only time you actually see him on screen is in No Russian, when you're quote-unquote on his side. With the president captured, peace talks screech to a halt, and in the next cinematic, you get to hear Yuri briefing Price and Soap on some intel on a cargo shipment in Africa. Now is when I feel like you really can start to draw some parallels to the story from past games. These feel eerily similar to the South America missions. We get some intel on a lead for one of Makarov's suppliers, and we're off to hunt them down to see if we can get any actual info on where to find Makarov. The first half sees you, Price, and Soap sneaking your way through the African bog, surgically removing any militia along the way. I gotta say, the simple formula Call of Duty has established with these stealth portions has never got old for me. There's just something so satisfying about it. After a while, you take the high ground and provide some overwatch for Soap and Price, but they're quickly compromised, and you switch to some guns blazing gameplay. You take over a mounted machine gun on one of the militia trucks and mow down all the resistance, but then a mortar shell takes out your truck, and now you're on the run again. You can't stop moving or the mortar will easily lock onto your position, so you scramble your way up to rush the mortar crew. A very brief fall leaves you alone for a few seconds, and it really is like the developers were just acknowledging the fact that this mission is super similar to the one we saw in the favela. Once you take out the mortar crew, you get to fire a few mortar shells for yourself. Say what you want about the game so far, but you can't argue that they didn't provide for some diverse gameplay. There's been stealth, all-out assault, predator missiles, drones, helicopter gunner, zero gravity, mortar controlling, and probably more that I'm missing, all in just the first few missions. After pushing your way through to the shipment point, you make it just in time to see the chopper flying away with the cargo seconds too late. British Special Forces catches wind of some suspicious cargo inbound, and the SAS are called to action with little to go on. You load in to do some recon on a shipment dock that's suspected to receive some of this cargo, and I always thought this was a pretty cool intro to the mission. It lets you get a feel for what you're up against, and the continuity is super cool as your team pops up on the cam, and you zoom in to take control of your cameo character for this mission, Burns. There's just something about the British Special Forces and stealth mission that hits so well every time. The calm callouts while slicing through your enemies before they even know you're there is something that will never not be satisfying. Another cool thing to point out is the difference in weaponry when it comes to who you're fighting with. Usually with the US side, you're with the old reliable M4. With the 141, you pretty much have whatever you can get your hands on, which fits the disavowed narrative, since the 141 isn't really a recognized branch of special forces anymore. And finally, with the British forces, you're using something like an MP5 or a G36C. I always thought that this was a nice attention to detail, and I'm not sure how accurate to real life circumstance this is, but I still appreciate it in the game. It gives another distinction between stories through weaponry, and indirectly characterizes each side even more. For example, you only have the fancy and undoubtedly expensive 9-bang style flash grenade when you're with the US side. Anyways, after the quick stealth mission, an impressively coordinated all-out assault launches on the shipping dock. After taking care of the opposition, the last truck left at the dock turns out to be empty. We saw several others leave earlier, so they must have gotten all the cargo and left this one as bait. Reinforcements arrive, and you and your squad push them all the way back to the subway, where yet another over-the-top chase scene follows. This will probably be the last time I mention just how over-the-top this game is. I think you get the point, and while I think they could have been a lot more down-to-earth, it's still just a video game, and you gotta respect them for not just taking the easy way out and doing the same thing as their last two successful games all over again. The chase is intense, and shooting at enemies in a moving train while also on an extremely out-of-control truck proves to be quite the challenge. Hopefully your reaction time is still on point and you weren't just spraying and praying, because you do pass a station with plenty of civilians oblivious to the underground skirmish. The driver in the truck in front of you gets taken down and unfortunately turns directly into the train's path. With just you and one member of your team left, you have to fight your way out of the subway, and the tunnels and escalators provide some really entertaining gunfights that require you to be paying attention to every crevice an enemy could be hiding in. After emerging from the underground, you meet up with some local police and friendly reinforcements to intercept a truck on the run. The truck has absolutely no way out and hopefully doesn't have any explosives on board, as you and your 50 new friends absolutely unload into it. With the truck subdued, you cut away before the mystery is revealed of what it contains. But I have a feeling that question won't be left unanswered for long.
What's the status on the others? Baseplate, come in! Baseplate, where are the trucks?
You got it? Are you recording? Okay, so this is day 3, London, and we're off to... Sarah, tell Daddy where we're going. We're on to Big Ben! That's right, Big Ben! Oh, there it is, sweetie. It's right there. Honey, are you getting this? Daddy, look over here! Look at me, Daddy! She's really hyper today. Sarah, don't go too far. Birds! Look, Mommy, there's birds! That's your daughter. You know she gets that from you.
MW3's No Russian moment. I feel like we all felt it coming when that familiar looking truck pulled up, but it still made every one of us flinch when it actually happened. They made you control the camera on a family vacation and really set it up so well to basically be a jump scare. They pull your attention away, with Big Ben in the background, the birds, your wife asking you to come closer, all just to distract you from the suspicious truck in the background. I'm sure we all sat there with our eyes and mouths wide open all the way through the next cutscene that shows that London wasn't the only place being hit, and just how widespread this really is. I think overall, that while this mission is mainly remembered for the last little bit with the family vacation, this was one of the first truly unique feeling missions in this game, and it was desperately needed. Like I said, the missions have been good so far. The fighting in New York was awesome, and it hit hard. The mission in Africa had some awesome variances in gameplay, but each of these feel like they copied over the blueprint from previous games. This one, however, felt like it was its own thing entirely. Fighting in the night in a rainy dock in London, a little stealth just to warm you up for the intense fighting to come, a chase scene unlike anything we've seen before, and then still more fighting after, and then finally to top it off, the bombshell at the end. I don't know that anyone would say this is their favorite mission in this game, but for me, it was definitely a turning point in my enjoyment for replaying it. After the chemical attacks, the Russians invade and make it clear that this wasn't just an act of terrorism. This is now a world war. And with that declaration, you get a perfectly timed, modern D-Day type invasion, with a massive force storming a beach in Hamburg to secure the vice president. Now it feels like the developers have really hit their stride with this one. They use the building blocks that they've laid in previous games to enhance the story, rather than just straight up copying it over. Your invasion team brute forces their way through the Russian defenses on the beach, and continues pushing through the city streets. The fighting is honestly pretty tough, as you have to pay attention to both sides of the road, look in the windows and check the alleys. It seems like as soon as you start moving forward, there will always be a perfectly aimed RPG coming right at you. After a sniper takes out your tank gunner, you hop right up and take his place. Being in control of a minigun will never not be fun, and driving through a parking garage in a tank is definitely something I never thought we'd be doing in Call of Duty. It proves to be super satisfying, as your minigun chews through the resistance and blows up all the abandoned cars, but as soon as you get to the ramp, all that fun goes downhill. I found this to be super hilarious and humanizing. It makes you think, how many times does stuff like this happen in real war? In the heat of the moment, I don't blame them at all for not thinking about the fact that these 70-ton tanks may have a problem going up a parking garage, but it's a hilarious oversight, and I'm sure there are many of them that happen, especially on a mission like this that's so massive in scale, but had to be so quickly planned. Anyway, after falling through the garage, you still have to push on to where they're holding the vice president hostage. The fighting is similar to before, minus the tanks of course, and you make it to the VP, securing him for evac. Like I said, this is where the game really starts to find its stride, and I think it's only up from here. As the Europeans and Americans work together to hold off the Russian invasion, Price and the 141 have their eyes on Makarov, the one really behind these attacks. Price contacts a British officer with the codename Baseplate, who we quickly learn to be Captain Macmillan from Pripyat all those years ago. The not-so-subtle callback to such an iconic mission works very well to weave the story of these characters together. And as you remember, while you played as Price and all gillied up, you saved Macmillan's life by carrying him for an eternity all the way to safety. Price calls in that debt in return for some intel on where Makarov may have gotten the gas from. With the intel on the compound, you load into a rare, guns-blazing mission with the 141. Nikolai and his chopper overhead softens up the enemy for you, and you barge through the gates at full speed. As always, the fighting proves to be pretty challenging, as there are enemies swarming from every corner and rooftop in sight, but then you get to take control of a remote turret on Nikolai's chopper, and suddenly, you're happy that all those red squares are there. The back and forth gameplay, switching between the chopper and pushing forward on foot, is super simple but super satisfying. You make your way to the compound, and it kinda sets in how second nature it's become with the 141. You and a couple other guys, and one chopper, just obliterated your way through an entire compound of enemies. Nearing the end, you breach and clear the final room with your person of interest. Price has a quick and friendly chat with him to get some info, and I'm not sure if I was the only one, But when Price first tossed him that mask, I was like, really? We're letting this guy live? But that thought was very short-lived, as obviously the rage behind so many dead to this horrible chemical outweighs any shred of mercy your team may have left. The mission could have very well ended right there. You got the intel you were after, but I'm glad they kept it going. A sandstorm had been looming all mission, and of course it's upon you just in time for us to need to leave. The first landing site falls victim to an ambush, and you're forced to move to a secondary location that only allows the sandstorm to creep closer and closer. At the second LZ, Nikolai takes some heavy fire, but you're able to take them out with the turret, or so you thought. Nikolai is down and the sandstorm is here, and your team seems like they're in a pretty rough spot. Fighting in the sandstorm provides a pretty cool dynamic, with the enemy obviously not really being able to see you, but conveniently they turn on their flashlights so they're pretty easy to spot. Most of the enemies aren't really even paying attention to you anyway, rather they're chasing after the helicopter they just downed with Nikolai in it. The team is desperate to reach Nikolai, and it really shows just how far you all have come since that mission in COD 4 when you saved him all those years ago. Who would have thought that this random informant would be such a pillar to the franchise? Once you reach the chopper, you hold off against charging militia and make a very dramatic escape through the sandstorm to safety. Overall, for just a quote-unquote filler mission that they really only needed to provide some intel to move the story along, the gameplay was very entertaining. The sandstorm provided for a unique set of circumstances, and the subtle character actions showed just how close the 141 squad has grown together. With the information on the bomb maker secured, Price and your team are halfway across the world, while the bomb maker is in Paris. So Price makes another connection to US forces through your team's leader, Sandman, to make sure it's taken care of. I'm not sure if there's some backstory as to how these two know each other, but it's clear that Price trusts him, so I've always wondered about that. You load in as Roach with two objectives: unpin a European team for being trapped by Russian forces, and then secure Volk, the bomb maker. Immediately, the aftermath of the chemical attack is on full display. You haven't gotten full exposure to what really happened since the family vacation video, so it hits really hard to show you just how messed up chemical warfare can be. The developers do a really good job using the first few minutes of this mission to let it sink in the magnitude of what happened. There's civilian bodies just laying everywhere in the buildings you walk through. There's debris everywhere, and no one is left alive. After the solemn intro, there isn't really much to talk about as far as the action goes. The fighting is very similar to earlier missions, obviously this time being set against the backdrop of Paris. You meet up with the GIGN team and make your way to pursue Volk. One small thing they added with this one is the smoke grenades to call in an airstrike, which is a pretty fun little add-on, and it's a tease for something that's coming up. After some more gunfights, your squad descends into the depths of the Paris catacombs, which I have to admit is a pretty awesome setting. You move through the darkness and eerie silence, with bones scattered all around you, and with the creepiness, you swear you start to see things.
How many bodies you think are buried down here? Don't know. Let's make sure we don't join them.
It turns out you weren't hallucinating, and an ambush leaves you blinded and on a chase to catch up to Volk. Back topside, you have a pretty intense and entertaining car chase that leads with your team taking Volk alive, somehow. I always thought it was hilarious that we're absolutely gunning it straight into his car, while he sits in the passenger seat with the driver dead, no way out, and we still absolutely ram his door in, which undoubtedly would have really left him injured if not dead. But anyway, like I said, I feel like the game really never loses its stride after the first few missions, and this one's no exception. I think what they've started to do different with MW3 is it feels like there's always more than one phase to each mission. With this one, you have the walk through the destruction, then meeting with the GIGN, then into the catacombs, and then the car chase. With the last one, you had the all-out assault on the compound, then fighting through the sandstorm and defending Nikolai, and so many others have that same feel. I thought it was cool that they found a way to keep innovating not just through gameplay or story, but with level progression as well. A direct continuation of the last mission, your squad is prepping to evac the Vice President when your Osprey gets shot down, and unexpectedly, you zoom out from Frost's perspective to one up above. And then you see the subtitle, say AC-130, and a smile comes across your face. Outside of multiplayer, we haven't piloted one of these things since the instant classic mission, Death from Above in COD 4. The AC-130 gun cycle is second nature at this point, and who would have thought that we'd all remember the gun cycle and the controls from all those years ago. Even if you didn't play multiplayer or weren't good enough to ever get one of these things, you knew the power at your fingertips because of the mission before. and what happened when you threw your smoke. The Russians have a massive force of tanks, infantry, and helicopters that are all ripe for blowing up in this massive circle, and no matter how old you are, it really feels like being a kid on Christmas morning. Outside of the joy of controlling weapons of mass destruction, there isn't much to say about this one. I will say I do miss the characterization we got from the COD 4 version, with the AC-130 crew having some humor and some pretty entertaining dialogue, but they kind of make up for it with how much stuff they give you to blow up. You protect your squad on the ground and provide cover fire for them to move up to the secondary evac point. After a while, you're thrown back down to the ground to take out some enemies that are giving your air support some trouble, but it's a pretty brief stint and then you're right back up in the air. It's rinse and repeat now. You protect your squad as they advance, but this time, once they get near their goal, you realize that the Eiffel Tower is where they're headed. Back on the ground, you deal with heavy Russian resistance on the bridge leading to the tower, and it's a pretty cool last stand style battle while you hold out for your reinforcements and evac to arrive. Watching the Eiffel Tower fall was a pretty insane thing to let you know how serious this conflict really is, and your squad is very thankful to get out of there after a hard fought battle. This mission starts what is, in my opinion, one of the best stretches of Call of Duty ever with regard to gameplay, story, emotion, and pretty much every other pillar of what makes the game great. With intel from the US team after their capture of the bomb maker, your squad finally has a lead on somewhere Makarov will be. He's meeting with some of his inner circle in a hotel in Prague, and the 141 is willing to do whatever is necessary to get there. You load in a sewage tunnel with Price and Soap just hanging out, as one does when they plan to assassinate the most notorious terrorists in the world. You hop in the water and emerge from the tunnel to see an army of Russian forces already on the ground, and what seems to be an infinite supply of vehicles in the air. It's a stormy, gray night, perfect for doing some sneaking around. After some quick maneuvering, you make it to the other side of the opening to meet up with an old friend, Kamarov, who's now leading the Czech resistance. They've built up an impressive gathering in the sewage system, right under the Russians' nose. You and Soap go on your own to navigate the streets that are sure to be filled with Russians, and you slip right back into that classic stealth gameplay we've been talking about so much. This time, the stakes couldn't be higher. If you're caught, there's no way you're fighting your way through the massive amount of forces the enemy has, and you get a few moments that really feel like all gillied up from COD 4. After sneaking your way to the courtyard area, there are way too many hostiles to sneak your way through, but Price lets you know that he has you covered.
Scout on the rooftop. Take care of him. Wait. Nice timing, old man. One's down, mate, but we've got 4 men and they've got dozens. Don't worry. I'll pull some friends.
I remember playing this for the first time as a kid and feeling so cool when all those lasers started pointing from the rooftop. They really did a good job with this one. With the resistance now on your side, you lead an all-out charge that unfortunately sees a ton of your side fall. The Russians just have too much ordnance on their side. They have tanks and BTRs, and the resistance are just some normal guys fighting in hoodies. After seeing the passion behind the resistance's fighting, you can't help but respect their bravery. But your squad keeps their eyes on the mission at hand, and once you make your way to the church, you and Soap set up in the church tower to take out Makarov once and for all. A brief cutscene breaks up the gameplay, and Soap's words leave you with a sense of looming dread, but you don't have time to think about that for now, as you load into Prague and Makarov's convoy is approaching. You scan the area, waiting for Makarov to walk into your sights. In the meantime, you locate Price on the top of the hotel, and your heart rate grows faster and faster as he slowly descends. Finally, you and Price work together to take out the guards on the balcony, and the curtains split to reveal nothing. There are a few enemies you have to pick off, but then the elevator doors open, and your worst nightmare becomes reality.
Kamarov. I'm sorry, Price.
Captain Price. Ад ждет тебя.
Price, get out of there!
Yuri, my friend. You never should have
What the
come
hell's he
here.
talking about? Get out now!
You and Soap take a massive fall from the tower, and with the Russians cascading down on your position, you have to carry Soap out of harm's way. All the while, Soap is in your ear with barely enough strength to talk, mumbling about what Makarov said. But there's no time for that now. After a quick catch of your breath in an alley, Soap's classic unwavering determination shows through, as he says,
Just patch me up.
It's not safe here. We have to move. Come on.
And it's clear that he seems to be regaining his strength. You and Price switch roles, with you now providing cover while he helps Soap. The Russians are swarming, and it seems their reinforcements never end, and you finally make it to a resistance safe house, but as soon as you look down at Soap, things have only gotten worse. You get Soap to a makeshift operating table, and Price's desperation really starts to show.
Not now, son. Just rest. Get a medic! Come on, stay with me, son. Price. Oh, no! Soap! No! Soap! You have to go now! Get off me!
I'm sorry.
Words can't describe how this made us feel when it happened. This is without a doubt a moment that's responsible for many tears. But the Russians are still moving in, and as much as Price hates to do it, you have to leave Soap behind. Just when it seems like Price is dealing with the situation at hand and putting Soap's last words to the side for now, you get a right hook to the face and go tumbling down some concrete stairs. An unhinged Price is something you don't want to mess with, so when Price asks, Yuri doesn't hesitate to answer, and you get a series of flashbacks into Yuri's past. Yuri and Makarov were there all those years ago in Pripyat when Price took off Zakhaev's arm. And again, they were the ones pulling the strings when the bomb dropped in the Middle East, driving Shepard to insanity. And finally, Yuri was there at the airport, but by then he had betrayed Makarov and had been left to die. With the explanation, Price allows Yuri to live, for now. This mission is a masterpiece. They tease you with the chance to assassinate the most vile Call of Duty villain to date, but instead, yet again, he's one step ahead, and your team pays the price for it. The reveal that Yuri knows Makarov at this point had been set up for long enough that it wasn't really that massive of a surprise, but the way they did it was done so perfectly, and the small detail that even after Makarov calls out Yuri by name, Soap still grabs him and throws him out of the exploding church tower first, before he gets himself to safety, making his death all the more gutting. Dragging Soap across the battlefield is very reminiscent to the missions with Price and McMillan in Pripyat, but this time, the ending isn't a happy one. Like I've said before, it seems like sometimes they copied and pasted the blueprint from other missions in the franchise, but this one just feels like an homage, while still being its own thing. The location is stunning. The hotel and surrounding area where Makarov was supposed to meet was beautifully done, and once you're out of the tower, the fighting is very intense, and Price's desperate attempt to convince not just Soap, but also himself that everything will be alright, makes you feel like you were really there, right alongside them. They give you that subtle sliver of hope when Soap's spirits lift a bit, but then when you're outside the safe house and see Soap in that puddle of blood, you know things aren't gonna end well. The voice acting from Price here is just stellar. He gets across so many different emotions in such a short time, and all from a character who's usually calm and collected. The flashbacks with Yuri provide some much needed backstory and are done very well as a kind of parade through the franchise's successes. It explains why Yuri knows so much about Makarov and his crew, and establishes him as another great character in the Modern Warfare story. This, in my opinion, is one of the best missions in the franchise, and every time I play it, I get that feeling like when you're watching episode 3 of Star Wars, thinking Anakin won't turn to the dark side, like maybe this time Soap and Yuri will make it out before the explosions, or Makarov's car won't be bulletproof, but it never will happen. The story ends the same way no matter what we do, and after losing the most beloved character in the Call of Duty franchise, we get a beautiful ode to the character we all grew up with, and like I said, you do not want to mess with an unhinged Captain Price.
There's a clock tower in Hereford where the names of the dead are inscribed. We try to honor their deeds, even as their faces fade from our memory. Those memories are all that's left when the bastards have taken everything else.
What happened?
He killed Soap. He's gone, Mac.
What do you need from me, son?
A location. Our Russian says Makarov used to cache weapons at an old castle near Prague. He's got nothing more solid than that.
Can you trust him?
What choice do I have? He's got his own reasons for wanting Makarov dead. Place ring any bells?
Aye. We ran drones over a suspect castle back in Zakhaev's day.
but we never got wind of our targets visiting the area.
What am I up against?
The place is a fortress. Only one way in or out. Unless you've learned to fly. Security office on the far side of the compound, and a command center north of that. Both were heavily guarded. If Makarov's there, he'll be in that control room. What's this you're sending me?
Equipment list.
That's a lot of hardware, John. What you plan on doing?
What you taught me to do. Kill them all.
The developers rise to the challenge with delivering a mission that meets the occasion of following up such a momentous twist in the story. Price has no more room for joy. There's no more banter. His voice is robotic. He's a soulless machine made with the purpose of killing. Yuri is the best of the best, but he'll be working harder than he ever has before to keep up with the husk of a man in front of him. He has nothing else to live for but revenge. You glide in on parachutes in the dead of night, just you and Price, against a castle full of Russians. Price lets you know that if you don't do everything he says, he'll leave you behind. You methodically carve your way deeper into the castle's defenses, leaving behind a trail of blood in your wake. As you move, you're sure to plant some C4 to cover your escape. You make it to a security checkpoint and just sit and watch as Price handles the guards. Down in a prison area, Price cuts the lights, and your night vision goggles help to make easy work of any defenders hindered by darkness. The enemy gets clever and throws some flares to temporarily blind you, but after removing your goggles, you make easy work of them. Finally, you make it to the makeshift bridge that provides the only way in or out of the castle, so of course some C4 is necessary. After making it across, Price leads you to an empty hall, where he gets a great idea. You use some explosives covered by the sound of the storm outside to blow a hole in the wall that will allow you to climb your way up to the control room. Once there, you watch a video conference as Makarov taunts the Russian president, and you learn that he's in pursuit of the president's daughter. During the conference, word is starting to spread that something's wrong, as they aren't hearing back from several groups of guards, and Price throws a little surprise to buy you some time to make your escape. You and Price fight your way through countless enemies, and you provide some sniper cover fire in a courtyard to keep pushing forward. You see some Russian reinforcements arriving, along with armor, but you make easy work of them with the explosives you planted earlier. Finally, you hop in a jeep and make a daring escape through heavy fire and glide your way to safety. I wouldn't bat an eye if you said this was your favorite mission in this game, as it yet again is a masterpiece. The setting is perfect, the weather matches how you feel after losing soap. Price's methodical anger is done so well, and the gameplay is still super entertaining and intense. I really have no complaints at all about the last few missions, and honestly probably the rest of the game as a whole, but I'm curious to know, what's your favorite mission from this game? I feel like I could totally understand any of the last 3 being up here, but even still, I can't hate on the missions in New York or Paris as well, as some of that stuff was really super cool to see too. Anyway, back with the US side, your squad is tasked with getting to the president's daughter before Makarov does. You load into an ambush, and what's in front of you doesn't even look like a city, it's just rubble. As you move, you fade away to a flashback to 20 minutes ago, before everything went downhill. I'm not sure that they've done this before, and while I don't think it's anything to lose your mind over, it was pretty cool to wonder how we ended up where we did. You and several other teams are dropped off on a rooftop to provide some cover fire for another team across the street. Sniping in Call of Duty has always been very satisfying, so it's a nice change of pace. After a while, you get to take control of a targeting system to call in some strafing runs on enemy reinforcements. And finally, you watch your team breach and clear to secure the president's daughter, but as they move in, a massive explosion happens and they go radio silent. With Granite Team down, your team decides to head for the daughter themselves, and you meet up with the German tank regiment to move forward. It feels like we've done this a few times now. You move along with your tanks, and you're making steady progress until you realize where things went wrong. Back to the present, you realize they dropped an entire building on top of you. You fight your way to the daughter with what's left of your squad, but they do a reverse breach that catches you off guard, and they barely get away as she's just out of reach. Overall, it was a fun mission that moved the story forward, and now that Makarov has the girl, it's likely that the president will fold, so nuclear war is imminent. The Americans track the daughter to a diamond mine in Siberia, and for the first time, Yuri, Price, and the Delta Squad are joining forces to get her back. The mine is a pretty awesome setting from the looks of the cinematic, and they've really done a great job with the creativity of their last few locations. You load into the mine's elevator doors opening for you to take out some enemies, but immediately the plan goes south. Fighting through the depths of the mine is just a really cool feeling, and when you finally make it to the bottom and head outside, the light is blinding, but it reveals yet another awesome looking area. The defenses are heavily fortified, but now you have the help of the Americans and have their toys on your side, so you get to call in some Predator missiles to soften things up. After a while, your progress gets halted by a ton of enemies dug in to stop you from entering where they're holding the president, but you get some help from above. You find the daughter, but they've taken the president deeper into the mine. You get a quick glimpse of him, and you and your squad link up to rappel down to the bottom of the mine. After fighting through even more resistance, Price gets a bright idea, and you drop down on top of your enemy to secure the president. As soon as your victory starts to set in, enemy reinforcements arrive, and you're stuck in the bottom of the mine with no way out. You make a glorious last stand with your combined squads, and finally your evac arrives, but not everyone makes it out alive. This one was always a fun one. I think the best part about it is the setting. Fighting in the mine is super cool, and it provides for some really awesome dynamic gameplay and is very creative. Sandman and the Delta Squad's final stand is a great way to end their story. Even though I wish we could have got a little more characterization and development from their squad, their heroic sacrifice still provides for a pretty emotional end to the overarching story of World War. However, with the president and his daughter secured, that only leaves one thing outstanding: Makarov.
To formally announce an end to the hostilities. On this historic day, the representatives of two great nations stand before you united.
There's a simplicity to war.
We declare that the time
Attacking is the only secret. Dare, and the world yields.
a chapter in which we pursue peace with the
How
same
quickly they forget that all it takes to change the course of history is the will of a single man.
our very existence.
Who's this?
Prisoner 627. I'm coming for you, Makarov.
Haven't you heard, Price? They say the war is over.
My war ends with you.
Like it ended for Captain McTavish. Tell me, Price, how long did it take him to die? I've destroyed your world piece by piece. It's only a matter of time until I find you.
You won't have to look far.
You load in as Price, as you and Yuri sit in the back of a truck that's getting showered with bullets. You each put on the final pieces of your Juggernaut armor, and realize there won't be a single aspect of stealth for this one. You bust open the doors and proclaim that you're finishing this once and for all, for soap. You charge through Makarov's personal defense force with little regard for your own life. With your armor, bullets are hardly a tickle, and you unload your light machine guns into the massive hotel, and slowly make your way forward. You hop on an elevator, but a chopper comes to stop your ascent, and your plan gets torn to pieces.
Our armor's shredded!
Without your armor, things will be a lot more difficult, but still you make your final push to Makarov before he gets out of there alive yet again. Makarov's desperation starts to show, as his men literally blow up the hotel beneath his feet to stop your ascent, but Price will not be denied, and I'll let the end of this game speak for itself. With Makarov hanging from the rafters in front of you, what else is left to do besides light up a cigar and marvel at your work? The end of this game is beautifully done. The final mission is intense and over the top, but in a good way that's deserving of the final mission of the trilogy. Yuri redeems himself by saving Price and allowing him to take out Makarov. His character served a wonderful role in this game, and I honestly wouldn't change anything about the 141 side of things. Overall, the game set out to do exactly what it wanted. It ends the story in what is, my opinion, a very well-deserved way. The characters we've grown to love are done justice, and even though Soap never got to see their goal realized, it wouldn't have been very realistic for your entire team to make it through to the end with no lives lost. Mission-wise, I feel like there's a clear set of 3 tiers for this game. The first few missions saw the developers play it safe with what they knew would work, which still allowed for some good and entertaining missions, but it struggled to form its own personality. Then, starting with the mission on the London dock, the game really found its own footing, and started to become something that I can say is still part of the classic Modern Warfare style, but now stands on its own. Great missions and settings, the story started to pick up, and the gameplay was fun as always as well. Finally, the last part of this game. Starting with the mission where you meet the Czech resistance in the sewers, saw this game at its best. It had its own feel, the settings were amazing, but also felt realistic, rather than forced just for show. The music hit hard, and the character performances made even the toughest of us shed a tear. The gameplay was nothing to write off either, and really, had the entire game been like this, I would have had to come up with another synonym for perfect. But put together, all 3 parts still form an undeniably great game. I think the gameplay is something that never wavered, but smaller things like voice acting, the musical score, and some borrowed vibes brought down the game from its predecessor bit by bit. With that said, the Modern Warfare series has come to an end. We say goodbye to an era of video games that changed the world forever, and I can't express enough how amazing these games were. My final ranking for MW3's campaign is an 8.4 out of 10, A tier. And now we're off to a new era, one that many would argue is equally as good, if not better. And that, of course, is Black Ops.